Hello everyone, the Brazen Eagle here. This is the start of my new series called Who Said This Speech? I will read an abbreviated version of a speech and then apply it to our modern day. So with that in mind, let's get started. Diversity has become one of the most often used words of our time, and a word almost never defined. Diversity is invoked in discussions of everything from employment policy to curriculum reform and from entertainment to politics. Nor is the word merely a description of the long-known fact that the American population is made up of people from many countries, many races, and many cultural backgrounds. All that was well known long before the word diversity became an insistent part of our vocabulary and invocation, an imperative or a bludgeon in ideological conflicts. The very motto of the country, E pluribus unum, recognizes the diversity of the American people. For generations, this diversity has been celebrated, whether in comedies like Abby's Irish Rose, also known as the famous play featuring a Jewish boy and an Irish girl, or in patriotic speeches on the 4th of July. Yet one senses something very different in today's crusades for diversity. Certainly not a patriotic celebration of America, and often a sweeping criticism of the United States or even a condemnation of Western civilization as a whole. The entire history of the human race, the rise of man from the caves, has been marked by transfers of cultural advances from one group to another and from one civilization to another. Paper and printing, for example, are today vital parts of Western civilization, but they originated in China centuries before they made their way to Europe. Much that became part of the culture of Western civilization originated outside that civilization, often in the Middle East or Asia. The game of chess came from India, gunpowder from China, and various mathematical concepts from the Islamic world, for example. The historic sharing of cultural advances, until they became the common inheritance of the human race, implied much more than cultural diversity. It implied that some cultural features were not only different from others, but better than others. The very fact that people, all people, whether Europeans, Africans, Asians, and others, have repeatedly chosen to abandon some feature of their own culture in order to replace it with something from another culture implies that the replacement served their purposes more effectively. Arabic numerals are not simply different from Roman numerals, they are better than Roman numerals. This is shown by replacing Roman numerals in many countries whose own cultures derived from Rome, as well as in other countries whose respective numbering systems were likewise superseded by so-called Arabic numerals. Manuscript scrolls once preserved the precious records, knowledge, and thought of European or Middle Eastern cultures. But once paper and printing from China became known in these cultures, books were clearly far faster and cheaper to produce and drove scrolls virtually into extinction. Books were not simply different from scrolls, they were better than scrolls. The point that some cultural features are better than others must be insisted on today because there are so many among the intelligentsia either evade or deny this plain reality. The intelligentsia often use words like perceptions and values as they argue, in effect, that it is all a matter of how you choose to look at it. They may have a point in such things as music, art, and literature from different cultures, but there are many human purposes common to people of all cultures. They want to live rather than die, for example. When Europeans first ventured into the arid interior of Australia, they often died of thirst or hunger in a land where the Australian Aborigines had no trouble finding food or water. Within that particular setting, at least, the Aboriginal culture enabled people to do what both Aborigines and Europeans wanted to do: survive. A given culture may not be superior for all things in all settings, much less remain superior over time, but particular culture features may nevertheless be clearly better for some purposes, not just different. Why, then, is there such any argument in the first place? Perhaps it is because we are still living in the long, grim shadow of the Nazi Holocaust and are understandably reluctant to label anything or anyone superior or inferior. But we don't need to. We only need to recognize that particular products, skills, technologies, agricultural crops, or intellectual concepts accomplish particular purposes better than their alternatives. It is not necessary to rank one whole culture over another in all things, much less to claim that they remain in the same ranking throughout history. They do not. What are the implications of a worldview of cultural diversity on the narrower issues being debated under that label in the United States today? Although diversity is used in so many different ways, in so many different contexts, that it seems to mean all things to all people, there are a few themes which appear again and again. One of these broad themes is that diversity implies organized efforts at the preservation of cultural differences, perhaps governmental efforts, perhaps government subsidies to various programs run by the advocates of diversity. This approach raises questions as to what the purpose of culture is. If what is important about cultures is that they are emotionally symbolic, and if differentness is cherished for the sake of differentness, then this particular version of cultural diversity might make some sense. But cultures exist even in isolated societies where there are no other cultures around, where there is no one else and nothing else from which to be different. Cultures exist to serve the vital, practical requirements of human life, to structure a society so as to perpetuate the species, to pass on the hard-earned knowledge and experience of generations past and centuries past to the young and inexperienced in order to spare the next generation the costly and dangerous process of learning everything all over again from scratch through trial and error, including fatal errors. Cultures exist so that people can know how to get food and put a roof over their head, how to cure the sick, how to cope with the death of loved ones, and how to get along with the living. Cultures are not bumper stickers. They are living, changing ways of doing all the things that have to be done in life. Every culture discards, over time, the things which no longer do the job, or which don't do the job as well as things borrowed from other cultures. Each individual does this consciously or not on a day-to-day basis. People eat Kentucky Fried Chicken in Singapore and stay in Hilton hotels in Cairo. This is not what some of the advocates of diversity have in mind. They seem to want to preserve cultures in their purity, almost like butterflies preserved in amber. Decisions about change, if any, seem to be regarded as collective decisions, political decisions. But that is not how any cultures have arrived where they are. Individuals have decided for themselves how much of the old they wish to retain and how much of the new they found useful in their own lives. In this way, cultures have enriched each other in all the great civilizations of the world. No culture has grown great in isolation, but a number of cultures have made historic and even astonishing advances when their isolation was ended, usually by events beyond their control. Those who use the term cultural diversity to promote a multiplicity of segregated ethnic enclaves are doing an enormous harm to the people in those enclaves. However they live socially, the people in those enclaves are going to have to compete economically for a livelihood. Even if they were not disadvantaged before, they will be very disadvantaged if their competitors from the general population are free to tap the knowledge, skills, and analytical techniques which Western civilization has drawn from all the other civilizations of the world, while those in the enclaves are restricted to what exists in the subculture immediately around them. We need to also recognize that many great thinkers of the past, whether in medicine or philosophy, science or economics, labored not simply to advance whatever particular group they happened to come from, but to advance the human race. Their legacies, whether cures for deadly diseases or dramatic increases in crop yields to fight the scourge of hunger, belong to all people, and all people need to claim that legacy, not seal themselves off in a dead end of tribalism or in an emotional orgy of cultural vanity. And that is the end of the selected speech. Now for my application. Diversity is a buzzword that we all hear about in our lives. Most assume that diversity, at least in the United States, refers to the different races that are found within the country, and is often used as an insult to the peoples that have made us and continue to make us successful. But just because you are of a different race does not mean that you are of a different culture. There are Asians who identify as white Americans. There are white Americans who culturally identify as black Americans. Race does not always represent culture. What is culture? Culture is one of, if not the most important aspect of a country. The culture of a country will shape its future and how it drives the people to act and react. Cultures exist, though, to keep people alive and to continue civilizations and avoid past mistakes. This is why we tell stories about the past. This is to hopefully prevent human errors from occurring again. Since the beginning of time, cultures have come and gone across the world, but they have had an impact on each other regardless of positive or negative outcomes. The speech given by this person references the use of Arabic numerals over Roman numerals. Arabic numerals are easier to read and to use in daily life, and thusly, Roman numerals have been relegated to select uses, such as for the Super Bowl or for Star Wars movies. This means that cultures inherently have items that are better than others, and ultimately some cultures are superior to others. That doesn't mean an entire culture is better than another, but at least some portion is. The idea that cultures are equal or equal in worth has obviously just been proven wrong. Equality, at least on a cultural level, does not exist. Cultures, though, for better or worse, change over time. They can become greater, and they can become worse. Ancient China was at one point the most advanced civilization in the world. But in our current year, they are trying to become a great power once again. They culturally fell behind Western civilization and is currently trying to catch back up. It is good to see, though, the benefits and hindrances of a culture and eventually adopt the practices that make your own culture better. This speech refers to using scrolls as a way to preserve knowledge. In today's world, our culture still uses books to do the same job as scrolls, but even that is being left behind for computers and alternative ways to educate the populace more effectively. And this is where we must adapt to our ever-changing world. If we want to remain competitive as a people, an American people, our culture needs to look at others to see if they have items that can benefit us as a whole. You must judge cultures and items by their outcomes. For example, for most of the United States, and not Flint, Michigan, it is safe to drink the tap water. In other countries, you are not encouraged to because it is disease. It will cause you problems. Another example is this. Why is communism and socialism so bad? It is because of its inevitable outcome, which is the destruction of any country and people that embrace it. Just look at Venezuela right now. You must judge items by their outcomes. However, this does not mean that we should encourage cultural diversity within a single nation. A house divided cannot stand. We should build a culture, though, that produces the best results. To start, we, as the United States of America, need to assimilate all people within our own borders and then look at ourselves and other cultures to see if adopting different items would benefit us more than what we already have or already do. An example is the German immigrants to the United States in the 19th century. They brought their piano playing and piano building skills to this country and have founded a major US company called Steinway & Son. This brought more music literacy and musicianship to the masses that continues to this day. That was a great cultural addition to the United States. Though, in our modern day, diversity is a code word for preserving cultural differences to ensure that cultural divisions remain within this country. Contemporary diversity is absolutely against the assimilation of all cultures into a single, productive culture that can foster the best results for the people as a whole. And most of the time, diversity of skin color and sex usually ends up with no diversity of thought. With that in mind, though, I will tell you who gave this speech at the beginning of the next video in this series. I hope you learned something today, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time.